Traverse Station sat at the very edge of known space, where the star lanes grew thin and the dark grew thick. It was an old place, built from 3 different alien hulls welded together over 100 years, and it groaned when the solar winds pushed against its shields. Most people who worked there called it the end of the map. Beyond it, there was nothing but the Veil, a wide stretch of dead systems that no ship dared to cross. Administrator Threll Vey had run this station for 11 years. She was Ashinari, a tall, gray-skinned woman with pale eyes that could see heat the way humans saw light. She liked the quiet of Traverse Station. It was far from the politics of the Concord Assembly, far from the arguments and the old guilt that never seemed to fade. Out here, she could just do her job and try not to think about the humans. But everyone on this station thought about the humans, whether they wanted to or not. 41 years ago, humanity had gone silent. One day there were human traders in the market ring, human pilots drinking in the bar, human ships docking every week. Then the Concord Assembly voted, the border closed, and the humans were gone. No messages came out from behind the veil. No ships. Nothing. Just silence, year after year, until most people stopped wondering if humans were even still alive. Threll wondered. She had been a young officer back then, part of the fleet that helped seal the border. She still remembered the last human ship she ever saw, a battered old cruiser called the Endeavor, its hull scarred black from the war, limping back toward Earth because the Concord had told its people to go home and stay there. She remembered the captain's voice on the comm, tired and flat, saying only, "Understood." No anger. No pleading, just that one word, and then silence. She had voted for the border closure herself, back when she was young and scared, and the Concord elders told her it was the only way to stop a bigger war. She still was not sure if she had done the right thing. Most nights she managed not to think about it. Tonight, she would not have that choice. It started as a small alert, nothing more than a flicker on the deep space sensor array. Ensign Cordain, a young Ashinari tech barely out of training, was running the night watch when his screen lit up with a shape it did not recognize. "Administrator," he said into the comm, "you should probably see this." Threll walked onto the observation deck a few minutes later, still half asleep, a mug of hot kaffa in her hand. "This had better be good, Cor." "It's a ship," Cor said. "Coming out of the Veil, big one. And Administrator, the transponder code is old, really old. Pre-war human registry." Threll's mug stopped halfway to her mouth. "That's not possible. Nothing comes out of the Veil. The dead systems killed every probe we ever sent in." "I know," Cor said, "but look." He pulled up the feed and put it on the main screen. A long, dark shape hung against the stars, moving slow and steady, its hull covered in old battle scars that had clearly been repaired many times over. Down the side of the ship, in faded letters that had once been painted bright white, were the words, US Prometheus. Threll felt her stomach drop. She knew that class of ship. She had fought against ships like it, decades ago, in the war that ended humanity's place among the stars. The Prometheus-class heavy cruiser had been one of humanity's newest designs at the time the war ended. If this ship had survived 41 years behind the Veil, it meant humans were still out there. It meant they were still building. It meant everything the Concord had assumed for 4 decades might be wrong. "Get me a channel," she said, "now." "Administrator." "Wait," Cor said, his voice suddenly tight. "There's more." He zoomed the sensor feed out, and Threll's breath caught in her throat. Behind the Prometheus, spilling out of the same jump point like water pouring from a broken dam, came more ships, dozens of them, then hundreds. None of the hull designs matched anything in the Concord registry. Sleek silver vessels shaped like teardrops. Boxy gray ships bristling with strange spines. Great curved shapes that looked almost alive, pulsing with soft blue light along their hulls. They came in ordered ranks, thousands of kilometers long from front to back, moving with the kind of discipline that only came from a real, battle-tested fleet. And at the front of it all, leading them, was one battered human warship.
"Administrator,"
Cor said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's not a fleet. That's an invasion." Threll did not answer right away. She stood very still, watching the numbers climb on the screen as the sensors tried and failed to count every ship in that formation. Her hands were shaking. but she made herself keep her voice steady when she finally spoke. "Sound the alert," she said. "Get every defense platform online, wake up the garrison, and get me a direct line to Concord Command, Priority 1, right now." The station exploded into motion around her. Alarms wailed through every corridor. Traders in the market ring grabbed their children and ran for the shelters. Dock workers scrambled to seal airlocks and power down civilian ships before they became targets. Somewhere far below, in the garrison levels, soldiers who had trained for years for a battle they never expected to actually fight, pulled on their armor with hands that would not stop shaking. Threll stayed on the observation deck, watching the fleet grow closer, minute by minute. She tried to imagine what kind of power it would take to build a force like that. Even the greatest fleets of the Concord, gathered from a dozen member worlds, could not match what she was seeing now. And it was being led by a single human ship that, by every record the Concord had, should have been destroyed or scrapped decades ago. "Concord Command is not answering," Core called out. "The channel keeps dropping. I think our transmitter is being jammed, but—" "Administrator, the jamming isn't coming from the alien fleet. It's coming from somewhere closer. I think it might be a fault in our own relay array." "Fix it," Threll said. "I need eyes on this, all the way back to the assembly." While the tech teams worked, the fleet kept coming. It did not scatter or spread out to surround the station the way an attacking force would. Instead, it slowed and formed a wide, careful ring around Traverse Station, thousands of kilometers out, weapons visibly powered down, running lights steady and calm. It was, Threll realized slowly, the formation of an honor guard. Not a siege. The Prometheus broke away from the ring and moved closer, alone, drifting toward the station at a slow, deliberate pace, as if it wanted everyone watching to have plenty of time to see it coming and understand there was no trick hidden inside its approach. "Administrator," Core said, "we're being hailed. It's them, the human ship." Threll's throat went dry. 41 years of silence, and now this. She thought of the last human voice she had ever heard, that tired captain of the Endeavor saying, "Understood," and then nothing at all. She wondered what voice she would hear now. "Put it through," she said. The screen flickered, then steadied into a picture. A man stood on the far side of the connection, in a dim gray bridge lit mostly by control panels. He looked to be in his 50s, with close-cropped gray hair and lines on his face that spoke of long years and hard decisions. He wore a simple dark uniform, with no medals or decoration, just a small patch on the shoulder that showed a stylized image of Earth. Behind him, other humans moved calmly at their stations, none of them rushing, none of them tense. It was the calm of people who had done this 1,000 times before. "This is Captain Marcus Cade," the man said, commanding the UES Prometheus, on behalf of the United Systems of Earth. His voice was steady, quiet, and carried no trace of anger, though Threll had expected some, after everything the Concord had done. "I'm speaking to Traverse Station. Am I addressing the station administrator?" "Yes," Threll said, forcing her voice not to shake. "This is Administrator Threll Vey." "Captain Cade, on behalf of the Concord, I have to ask, what is the meaning of this fleet? Why have you crossed the veil, and who are these ships that follow you?" Cade was quiet for a moment, studying her through the screen, the way a man studies an old photograph, trying to remember a face he once knew. "Administrator," he said finally, 41 years ago, this station watched Earth close its own gate and walk into the dark, because the Concord Assembly decided that was easier than standing beside us. I understand why you're afraid right now. I would be too, in your place." He paused. "But I did not bring this fleet here to hurt you. I brought it here because in a few days, something far worse than us is going to come through that same jump point, and it is going to try to burn every world the Concord has ever built. We came to warn you. And we came to help, if you'll let us." Threll felt the floor of the observation deck seem to tilt beneath her feet. "Help us," she repeated. "After everything." "I know," Cade said, cutting her off gently, not unkindly. "I know what it looks like. Humanity vanishing for 41 years, then showing up with a fleet bigger than anything the Concord has ever fielded, right when trouble is coming. I would not believe me either, if I were sitting where you're sitting." He glanced briefly at something off-screen, then looked back at her. "But you don't have to trust my word alone. You have sensors. Scan our fleet. Scan the Prometheus. You'll see our weapons are powered down. You'll see none of our ships have moved to threaten your station. And in a few hours, you're going to see something come through that jump point behind us that will make all of this argument feel very, very small." "What is coming?" Threll asked, though some cold part of her already suspected the answer. Cade's face, for the first time, showed something like old pain. "The Veil Dominion," he said. "The same enemy that put humanity behind the veil in the first place. Except now they're not interested in one border world anymore. They found something out past the dead systems that made them strong enough to come for everyone, including you." The name hit Threll like a physical blow. The Veil Dominion. The reason for the war that had ended with humanity, exiled behind the border. The Concord's official records claimed the Dominion had been driven off after that war, weakened, no longer a threat. Every strategic assessment for 40 years had been built on that assumption. "That's not possible," she said, though her voice had lost its certainty. "The Dominion was broken." "Our intelligence reports." "Your intelligence reports are 41 years old and built entirely on what the Dominion wanted you to see," Cade said. "We've been watching them the whole time. We've been fighting them, in fact, on and off, for most of those 41 years. In the dead systems your ships never dared to enter. That's most of what this fleet behind me actually is, Administrator. It's not just a human fleet. It's every species the Dominion has hurt in the last 4 decades, banded together, because we all learned the same lesson the hard way. None of us could beat them alone." Threll looked past his image, out through the observation window, at the vast, quiet ring of alien ships surrounding her tiny station, waiting patiently, weapons cold. She thought about the young officer she had been, voting to seal the border because the Concord elders had told her it was the safe choice. She thought about the years of silence that followed, years she had spent quietly assuming that silence meant humanity had simply faded away, perhaps died out entirely behind that wall of dead stars. Instead, they had built an army. "Captain Cade," she said slowly, "I need you to understand something. I cannot simply grant you access to Concord space. There are protocols. The Assembly will need to be informed. There will need to be a vote." "Administrator," Cade said, and for the first time there was a hard edge in his voice, though he kept it controlled. "I understand protocol. I spent 4 decades learning to respect the walls other people build around themselves. But I need you to understand something too. We are not asking for permission to save you. We're telling you what's coming, because it's the decent thing to do, and because Earth does not forget what decency looks like, even when it was shown very little of it. You have maybe 6 hours before the Dominion Vanguard reaches this system. I would suggest using that time to talk to your assembly very quickly, instead of talking to me." Before Threll could answer, Kor's voice cut in, urgent and afraid. "Administrator, new contact at the jump point. Multiple contacts. There. Administrator, the numbers are still climbing. I can't get an accurate count." Threll turned to the sensor display, and her blood went cold. A second cluster of ships had begun pouring through the same point in space that the human fleet had just come from, except these ships were nothing like the calm, orderly formation Cade had brought with him. They came in a jagged, hungry swarm, black hulls veined with sickly green light, weapons already glowing hot even at this distance. On the screen, Cade's expression did not change. He had clearly expected this, had perhaps even known the exact hour it would happen. "There they are," he said quietly. "Administrator Vey, I need an answer, and I need it fast. Do you want my fleet standing between your station and that swarm, or do you want to face it alone, while your assembly argues about protocol?" Threll looked at the swarm growing on her screen, then at the calm, waiting ring of allied ships surrounding her station, then finally at the tired, steady face of the human captain, who had crossed 41 years of silence and an ocean of dead stars to warn a people who had once abandoned his. "Captain Cade," she said, her voice finally steady again. "Traverse Station requests immediate defensive support from the United Systems of Earth and its allied fleet." Cade almost smiled. "Good answer, Administrator," he said. "Now hold on tight. It's about to get loud out there." Behind him, the great ring of alien and human ships began to move, engines flaring bright against the dark, turning as one toward the swarm pouring through the jump point. And as klaxons screamed through every corridor of Traverse Station, Threll Vey found herself hoping, for the first time in 41 years, that humanity truly had grown as strong as it now appeared. because if it had not, none of them were going to survive the next 6 hours. 41 years earlier, Threll Vey had stood in the great chamber of the Concord Assembly and watched the vote pass that sealed humanity behind the veil. She had been young then, barely out of her officer training, seated in the back rows where junior delegates were allowed to watch but never speak. She remembered the human ambassador that day, a woman named Elena Reyes, standing alone at the center of the chamber, while 100 alien delegates debated her people's fate, as if she were not even in the room. "You are asking us to abandon a member world," Reyes had said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber despite the noise. "Earth joined this concord in good faith. We fought beside you against the Dominion when they came for the border colonies. We lost 12 million people in that war, and now you want to draw a line around us and call it peace." The Cathari speaker, an ancient, slow-moving delegate whose people had led the Concord for 3 centuries, had answered her with the calm patience of someone explaining a simple fact to a child. "Ambassador Reyes, the Dominion has made clear that further conflict will not stop at your border. They have offered a truce, on the condition that humanity's system be isolated. The Assembly has a duty to protect the greater Concord. One world's sacrifice, against the safety of 100 others, is not a difficult calculation. It is not a sacrifice if you are the ones making it, and we are the ones paying for it," Reyes had said. The vote passed anyway, 84 in favor, 6 against, the rest abstaining. Threll remembered how quiet the chamber had gone afterward, how Reyes had simply nodded once, gathered her small human delegation, and walked out without another word. Threll had expected shouting, or tears, or some kind of plea. Instead, there had only been that terrible, dignified silence, the same silence that would eventually swallow the entire human system for 4 decades. She thought about all of this now, standing on the observation deck of Traverse Station, watching Captain Marcus Cade's fleet turn to meet a Dominion swarm that outnumbered even his impossible force. She wondered if Cade knew that name, Elena Reyes. She wondered if that ambassador was still alive somewhere behind the veil, and what she would think of her people now. "Administrator," Kor said, voice tight with fear. "Dominion Vanguard will reach engagement range in 90 seconds. Get the civilian ships into the shelter bays," Threll ordered. "Bring the defense platforms to full power, and somebody find out if the Assembly has answered my emergency transmission yet." "Nothing yet," Kor said. "I think our long-range relay really is damaged. We might be cut off from Concord Command until this is over." Threll almost laughed at the cruelty of it. 41 years of silence from Earth, and now, in the moment she most needed to speak to her own government, silence found her too. On the main screen, Cade's fleet had begun to reshape itself, the great ring tightening and shifting into overlapping formations that reminded Threll of old naval tactics from Concord Military Academy, except executed with a precision she had never seen from any Concord fleet exercise. The Prometheus took position near the center, not hiding behind the larger Allied ships, but leading from a place where every other captain in the fleet could see it and follow its movements. "All ships, this is Prometheus Actual." Cade's voice came over an open channel that Traverse Station's systems automatically picked up. "Hold formation Bravo 7 until the Vanguard commits, then execute the anchor pattern. Doran cruisers, watch your flanks. They'll try to slip fighters around your outer hulls, the way they did at Corvin Reach. Cathari carriers, keep your strike wings back until we've thinned their point defense. Everybody remembers the drill. Let's show these people why the dead systems never actually killed us." A ripple of acknowledgments came back across dozens of different alien voices and dialects, translated roughly by the fleet's shared comm system, some sounding calm, some eager, a few sounding grimly amused, as if this were a routine they had performed together many times before. Threll realized, with a strange chill, that this fleet was not new. It was not thrown together for this crisis. These species had clearly been fighting alongside each other, and alongside humanity, for years. The Dominion Vanguard hit the formation like a hammer striking a shield, and for one long, terrible moment, Traverse Station's sensors filled with so much weapons fire that the display simply became a wall of white noise. Threll gripped the railing of the observation deck and forced herself to keep watching, even as every instinct told her to look away. When the sensor feed cleared enough to make sense of again, she saw that the Allied fleet had held, more than held. The tight, overlapping formation Cade had ordered was already peeling apart Dominion ships 2 and 3 at a time, catching them in crossfires from angles that should not have been possible with such a mixed collection of different hull designs and weapon types. It was, Threll realized slowly, not a fleet that had simply been assembled by chance or desperation. It was a fleet that had been built, trained, and fought together, on purpose, for a very long time, by someone who understood how to make wildly different species work as a single machine. Direct hit on the Prometheus, Kor called out suddenly, his voice cracking. Shields down to 60%, they're taking heavy fire. Threll's eyes snapped to the human ship in the center of the formation. 3 Dominion cruisers had broken off from the main swarm and converged on it, clearly recognizing the Prometheus as the fleet's anchor point, exactly as Cade had predicted about their tactics. Weapons fire lit up its scarred hull in bright flashes, and for a moment, Threll was certain she was about to watch the ship that had crossed 41 years of silence get torn apart in front of her. Then the Prometheus did something Threll had never seen a warship do before. Instead of retreating or calling for support, it turned directly into the incoming fire, closing the distance to point-blank range with the nearest Dominion cruiser, and unleashed a spread of weapons fire, so concentrated and precise that the enemy ship's shields collapsed in a single volley. A second volley tore straight through its hull, and the Dominion cruiser broke apart in a silent, terrible bloom of light. "They're not running," Kor said, disbelief plain in his voice. "Administrator, they're not running from anything." Threll watched, transfixed, as the Prometheus turned on the second attacking cruiser, with the same brutal efficiency, its remaining shields flickering but holding, its weapons finding gaps in the enemy's defenses that no Concord tactical computer would have identified in time. Around it, the rest of the Allied fleet mirrored the same aggressive, confident style of fighting, species after species falling into patterns that clearly all traced back to the same hard-won lessons. "They've done this before," Threll murmured, "many, many times before." The battle raged for nearly 20 minutes, though it felt far longer to Threll, standing helpless on her own station, while the true fight happened thousands of kilometers away. Traverse Station's own weak defense platforms fired what they could at any Dominion ship that strayed close enough, more out of the desire to do something than out of any real belief they were making a difference. Mostly, Threll simply watched. She watched the strange teardrop-shaped ships, which Cade had called Doran cruisers, dance through the battle with impossible speed, using tight, spinning maneuvers that seemed to bend the usual rules of fleet combat. She watched the great curved vessels, glowing with soft blue light, which she realized must belong to the Cathari, though these Cathari ships were nothing like the slow, cautious vessels the Concord's own Cathari members used. These fought with an aggression that felt almost like anger, striking hard and fast, as if avenging something. And in the middle of it all, the Prometheus kept fighting, taking hit after hit, systems failing and being brought back online by crews Threll could only imagine working in a desperate, practiced fury below decks, refusing to retreat, even as its hull grew more scarred with every passing minute. Finally, the Dominion vanguard broke. It happened suddenly, the way a dam breaks, one moment holding and the next moment simply gone. The surviving Dominion ships, perhaps a third of what had come through the jump point, turned and fled back toward the wormhole they had emerged from, pursued for a short distance by a wing of the small, fast Doran cruisers, before Cade's voice came over the open channel again, ordering them to let the enemy go. "All ships, stand down from pursuit," Cade said, his voice tired but steady. "Form up on the station and begin damage assessment. Good work, everyone. That's one less scouting force they'll have when the real fleet comes." Threll's knees nearly gave out with relief. Around her, the observation deck erupted into stunned, disbelieving cheers from the small crew who had watched the whole thing unfold, most of them Ashinari who had never expected to see combat in their lives, now watching an alliance of strangers save their home. "Administrator," Kor said quietly, once the noise had died down a little, "the Prometheus is hailing us again." Threll straightened her uniform, took a slow breath, and nodded. "Put him through." Cade's face appeared on the screen once more, a fresh cut above his eyebrow that someone had already bandaged, his uniform smudged with soot from some fire on the bridge that had clearly been put out only minutes before. Behind him, the bridge crew looked exhausted but calm, already back at their stations, working through the aftermath of the fight like people who had done this exact routine many times before. "That was the vanguard," Cade said without preamble. A scouting force, sent ahead to test your defenses and report back. The real Dominion fleet is still coming, Administrator, and it will be considerably larger than what you just saw. I'd guess we have perhaps 3 days before it arrives, maybe less. You knew they would attack here, Thrall said slowly. That's why you brought this fleet directly to Traverse Station, instead of going anywhere else first. We've been tracking Dominion fleet movements from our side of the Veil for years, Cade said. When we picked up their staging patterns a few months ago, this station was the obvious first target. It's the gateway between the dead systems and Concord space. If they take Traverse Station, they have a clean road straight to every world the Concord has ever built. We came as fast as we could. Thrall studied him for a long moment. Captain Cade, I have to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Why? After everything the Concord did to your people, why come back to save us at all? You could have let the Dominion have this station. You could have let them exhaust themselves against the Concord and stayed safe behind your veil. Cade was quiet for a moment, and something old and tired passed behind his eyes. Administrator, when the Assembly voted to seal us behind that border, 41 years ago, humanity lost a lot. We lost trade. We lost allies. We lost access to half the galaxy we had only just started to explore. But we did not lose the ability to remember what it feels like, to need help and not receive it. He leaned slightly closer to the screen. We decided a long time ago that whatever happened to us, we were not going to become the kind of people who let others suffer the way we suffered, just because we finally had the power to look away instead. That's why we're here. Thrall felt something tighten in her throat that she had not expected, something that felt uncomfortably close to shame. And beneath it, a strange and cautious hope. I owe you an apology, Captain. I was part of the Assembly vote that sent your people behind that veil. I was young and frightened, and I believed the elders when they told me it was the only way to keep the peace. I have spent 41 years wondering if that was true. It wasn't, Cade said simply, without cruelty, just stating a fact. But I didn't come here for an apology, Administrator, and you don't owe me one. On behalf of a vote you cast when you were young enough to still be lied to by people you trusted. What I need from you now is cooperation. In 3 days, a Dominion fleet is going to arrive here that will make what you just witnessed look like a training exercise. I need this station's defense grid integrated with our fleet's tactical network. I need your assembly to finally listen to what's coming, instead of arguing about protocol while the sky burns. And I need you to trust me, at least a little, because we are about to be fighting side by side, whether either of us fully likes it or not. Thrall looked past him, out at the battered but victorious fleet, still holding position around her station, at the wreckage of Dominion ships slowly cooling in the vacuum, at the strange and wonderful collection of allies humanity had somehow gathered in 41 years of silence. You'll have your cooperation, Captain Cade, she said, and for whatever it's worth, from one who was there, welcome home. For the first time since the connection had opened, Marcus Cade allowed himself something close to a real smile, tired and worn, but genuine. It's good to be back, Administrator, he said. Now let's get to work. We don't have much time before the real fight begins. 3 days. That was how long Thrall Vey and the crew of Traverse Station had before the real Dominion fleet arrived, and in that time, the station changed more than it had in the previous 11 years combined. Human engineers came aboard within hours of the battle's end, small teams moving through the station's corridors with quiet efficiency, connecting Earth's tactical network to the station's own aging systems. They were polite, careful, and worked long hours without complaint, but Thrall noticed that none of them talked much about themselves. When she asked one young technician, a woman named Priya Osei, what Earth was like now, the woman had simply smiled and said, "Different. Better in some ways, you'll see, if this all works out." It was Captain Cade himself who finally gave Thrall a fuller picture, on the second night, when he came aboard the station in person to walk the defense grid with her and review the plan for the coming battle. They stood together in the station's old command center, a room that had not seen this much activity in years, surrounded by holographic displays showing fleet positions and defense platform readiness. "You want to know what happened to us?" Cade said, not as a question. Everyone does, eventually. It's usually the first thing they ask, once the fear wears off a little. "I have wondered for 41 years," Threll admitted. We assumed the worst. Many in the Concord believed your people had died out entirely, or been conquered by the Dominion after all, and simply never told to speak of it again. Cade allowed himself a small, humorless laugh. The Dominion tried. For the first 6 years after the border closed, they kept probing our defenses, testing us, looking for weakness. We lost a lot of good people in those years. Earth's fleet in those days was small and old, and half of what we had left had been damaged in the First War. He gestured at a display showing a star map, a wide, dark region marked simply as the Dead Systems. But something strange happened when the Concord sealed the border. It didn't just cut us off from you. It cut the Dominion's supply lines to their forward staging grounds too. Suddenly they were fighting us on our terms, far from their real home territory, without easy resupply. You survived on that alone? Threll asked. We survived because we had no other choice, Cade said simply. Every ship we built after that first year was built to fight in the Dead Systems, in the dark, without support. We stopped designing warships the way the Concord taught us, and started designing them the way the fighting actually demanded. Smaller crews, more automation, weapons that could be repaired with whatever scrap we had on hand, because resupply from Earth sometimes took months to reach the front lines. He paused. About 8 years in, one of our long-range scouting ships found something none of us expected. A signal, buried deep in a dead system nobody had ever properly explored, coming from a species we'd never encountered before. The Doran, Threll guessed. Cade nodded. They'd been enslaved by the Dominion for almost 2 centuries by the time we found them. Small people, barely 1.5 meters tall on average, but brilliant engineers, some of the best minds for propulsion and stealth technology I have ever encountered. The Dominion kept them as forced labor, building ships and weapons, because Doran minds work in ways that make certain kinds of engineering almost effortless for them. When our scout ship found their hidden colony, half-starved and terrified of what we might be, we had a choice to make. You freed them, Threll said. We tried, Cade said. It cost us the scout ship and most of its crew. But word got back to Earth, and Earth decided that if we were going to keep fighting the Dominion anyway, we might as well fight for something more than just our own survival. He looked at Threll steadily. That was the real turning point, Administrator. Not some clever new weapon, not a stroke of military genius. It was the moment humanity decided that the war we were already fighting could mean something bigger than simple survival. After that, when we found other species suffering under the Dominion, and we found several more over the years, we didn't just help them, we asked them to fight beside us. Most of them said yes. Threll found herself thinking of the great assembly chamber, of Ambassador Reyes standing alone, while 100 delegates decided her people's fate without truly listening to her. She wondered how many of those same delegates would recognize the fleet now sitting outside their station as belonging to the same small, isolated world they had cast aside. The Cathari ships in your fleet, she said slowly. They fight nothing like the Cathari members of our own Concord. Ours are cautious, slow to commit to anything. Yours fought like they had something to prove. Different branch of the same people, Cade said. A colony that broke away from the main Cathari homeworld generations ago, settled deep in what's now the Dead Systems, and got caught directly in the Dominion's path when the war expanded. The Concord Cathari didn't know their cousins were even still alive out there until we told them, about 6 years ago. That was an interesting conversation. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Turns out losing contact with family for 150 years, and then finding out they've been surviving Dominion occupation the whole time, makes people surprisingly motivated to help build a war fleet. Threll absorbed this in silence for a long moment, trying to reshape everything she thought she understood about the last 41 years. How large is your alliance now, Captain? Truly? I saw perhaps 4 or 5 distinct hull designs in the fleet outside my station. 9 species all told, Cade said. Not all of them sent ships here. Some are still rebuilding their own worlds and couldn't spare a fleet. Others are too far from the front lines to reach us in time. What you're seeing outside your station is what we could gather on short notice, once we learned the Dominion was moving on the Concord border. If we'd had another month of warning, this fleet would be twice the size. And Earth leads all of this, Threll said. It was not quite a question, but Cade answered it anyway. Earth doesn't lead so much as we hold it together, he said. Every species in the Alliance has its own government, its own fleet commanders, its own say in how the war is fought. But humanity was the first to start this, and we're the ones with the ships and the experience to coordinate a fight across so many different worlds and cultures at once. So yes, in practice, when the fleet needs one voice speaking for all of it, that voice is usually human. He met her eyes. It's not a role we asked for, Administrator, and it's not one we're especially comfortable holding, but somebody has to do it, and 41 years of fighting the same enemy from a dozen different corners of the dead systems taught us how. The conversation was interrupted by the sudden chime of an incoming transmission, and Kor's voice came over the command center's speakers, tight with tension. Administrator, Concord Command has finally responded to your emergency transmission. They're demanding an immediate briefing. And Administrator, the word of the battle has already reached the Assembly. They know a human fleet destroyed a Dominion Vanguard force at Traverse Station. There's a lot of shouting happening in the chamber right now. Threll closed her eyes briefly. Put them through to the main screen. The Concord Assembly emergency session appeared on the display a moment later. A dozen alien delegates crowded into a smaller chamber than the full assembly hall, all talking over one another, until a stern-faced Cathari elder finally called the room to order. Threll recognized her immediately, Speaker Doln Vash, one of the most senior members of the Concord government, and, uncomfortably, one of the delegates who had voted to seal humanity behind the veil 41 years ago. Administrator Vey, Speaker Vash said, her ancient voice carrying easily through the connection. Explain yourself. We are told a human warship has appeared at Traverse Station, accompanied by an unregistered fleet of unknown origin, and that this fleet has already engaged in combat within Concord territory, without assembly authorization. Speaker Vash, Threll said carefully, the fleet in question destroyed a Dominion scouting force that would otherwise have overrun this station within the hour. Without their intervention, I would not currently be speaking to you at all. A ripple of uneasy muttering passed through the assembled delegates. Speaker Vash's expression did not change. The Dominion Empire signed a non-aggression agreement with this Concord 41 years ago, Administrator, in exchange for the isolation of the human system. Are you telling this council that agreement has been violated? I am telling this council, Threll said, feeling something harden inside her that had been soft and uncertain for most of her career. That the Dominion has spent 41 years growing stronger behind that same border you all agreed to, and that a much larger force is currently en route to this station, expected to arrive within 2 days. I am also telling you that the only reason Traverse Station still exists to report this to you is because the very people you exiled decided to come back and defend a Concord that abandoned them. The chamber erupted into noise again, delegates shouting over one another in half a dozen different languages, until a new voice cut through it, cool and measured. Threll recognized the speaker as Ambassador Kes Doran, one of the younger delegates on the council, a Doran himself, small even by the standards of his own people, seated at the very edge of the chamber where junior members were usually placed. If I may, Kes Doran said, and something in his tone made even Speaker Vash pause. I believe I can speak to the nature of this alliance the Administrator describes, if the council will permit. Threll blinked in surprise. She had not known there was a Doran delegate seated on the Concord Assembly at all. My people were enslaved by the Dominion for nearly 2 centuries before the humans found us, Kes Doran continued, his small frame somehow filling the chamber with quiet authority. I was born in a Dominion labor camp, Speaker Vash. My mother died there. I have seen what this enemy does to species it considers useful only as tools, and I have seen what it does to species it considers only as obstacles. If Administrator Vey is telling you a Dominion fleet is coming for the Concord border, I would advise this council to believe her, and to be very grateful that humanity chose to warn us at all, given how we treated them. The chamber went quiet, in a way it had not managed since the session began. Speaker Vash studied the small Doran ambassador for a long moment, her ancient face unreadable, before finally turning back to the screen showing Threll. Administrator Vey, she said slowly, you will keep this council informed of the situation at Traverse Station as it develops. In the meantime, this assembly will convene an emergency session to determine the appropriate response to these developments. She paused, and something almost like discomfort crossed her weathered features. Is Captain Cade available to address this council directly? Cade stepped into view of the screen, standing beside Threll with the calm, patient bearing of a man who had waited 41 years for this exact moment and intended to make the most of it. "I'm here, Speaker Vash," he said simply. The old Cathari elder studied him for a long moment, and Threll thought she saw, buried deep beneath decades of political caution, something that might have been genuine shame. "On behalf of this assembly," Speaker Vash said slowly, "I extend our gratitude for your fleet's intervention at Traverse Station." "You're welcome, Speaker," Cade said, "but I'd save the gratitude for later. The fleet that's coming next is not a scouting force. If the Concord wants to survive what's about to arrive here, this council is going to need to make a decision a great deal faster than it managed 41 years ago, because this time, there won't be a second chance to get it right." Far beyond Traverse Station, deep within the dead systems that no Concord ship had dared to cross in 41 years, the true Dominion fleet moved through the dark like a slow, patient tide. Its commander stood on the bridge of the Dominion flagship, a massive vessel called the Kral Vos, which meant, roughly translated, the ending of small things. High Marshal Ethrax Kell was old by Dominion standards, his chitinous gray hide scarred from 3 centuries of campaigns across a dozen conquered systems, his 4 dark eyes fixed on the tactical display showing the fleet's slow, inevitable approach toward the Concord border. He had heard the reports from his vanguard's destruction with something less than anger. Anger was a young commander's response to setbacks. Ethrax Kell had learned long ago that surprises on the battlefield were simply information, and information, properly used, was worth more than any single lost squadron. "So the humans finally show themselves again," he said, his voice a low rasp that carried easily across the bridge. "After 41 years hiding behind their little wall. Tell me, Commander Vresh, did our intelligence reports not assure me this species had been thoroughly broken by our first war with them?" Commander Vresh, a younger officer standing at rigid attention beside the tactical station, hesitated before answering. "The reports were incomplete, High Marshal. Our observation posts along the dead system's edge were destroyed years ago. We have had no reliable intelligence on human activity since shortly after the border closure. And yet you allowed our vanguard force to proceed without proper reconnaissance," Ethrax Kell said, not raising his voice, which was somehow worse than shouting would have been. "A scouting force, built to test Concord defenses, walked instead into a trap of human design, and lost 2/3 of its strength to an enemy we believed no longer existed as a meaningful military power. Explain to me, Commander, how this happened." Vresh's mandibles clicked nervously. "High Marshal, our best analysis suggests the human fleet was not acting alone. Sensor data, recovered from the surviving Vanguard ships, indicates the presence of at least 8 distinct alien hull signatures, none matching any known Concord member species. We believe the humans may have built some manner of alliance during their period of isolation." Ethrax Kell was quiet for a long moment, his ancient eyes studying the tactical display, where the last known position of the human fleet blinked steadily near Traverse Station. Slowly, something that might have been respect, or might simply have been recalculation, crossed his scarred features. "An alliance," he said finally, "built in the dead systems, from whatever scraps of resistance survived our occupation over the years. How resourceful." He turned fully toward Vresh. "Tell me, Commander, how many ships remain in our main battle fleet?" 412 war vessels, High Marshal, including 11 capital ships and the Kral Vos itself. "And the human fleet at Traverse Station?" "Best estimate places it between 200 and 250 vessels, High Marshal, of mixed and unknown design." Ethrax Kell allowed himself something close to a smile, an expression that showed rows of dark, serrated teeth. "Then the mathematics remain firmly in our favor. Whatever tricks this alliance has learned in the shadows, we will not repeat the Vanguard's mistake of underestimating them, but neither will we allow a single unexpected victory to convince us this enemy has somehow become unbeatable. Set course for Traverse Station, full battle formation. I want every ship's shields at maximum efficiency, and every weapon system tested twice before we arrive. This time, the humans will face the true strength of the Dominion, not a scouting party sent to merely test the water." "Yes, High Marshal," Vresh said, already turning to relay the orders. "One more thing, Commander," Ethrax Kell added, almost as an afterthought, though his tone carried a weight that made Vresh pause. "Send word ahead. through whatever channels remain open to the Concord Assembly. Tell them that if they choose to fight alongside this human alliance, the terms of our old truce are void, and every world in the Concord will be treated as an enemy combatant. Let us see how quickly their courage fades once they understand the true cost of their choice. Back at Traverse Station, that same threat arrived less than an hour later, broadcast on an open channel that every ship and station within range could hear. Threll Vey listened to the cold, rasping voice of High Marshal Ethrax Kell deliver his ultimatum, and felt the fragile confidence that had been building over the past 2 days begin to crack. "They're trying to split us apart before the battle even begins," Cade said, standing beside her in the command center as the message finished playing. Classic Dominion strategy. Threaten the weaker party, hope they fold before the fighting starts, and pick off whatever's left afterward. "It may work," Threll admitted quietly. "Speaker Vash has not yet committed Concord forces to this fight. If the threat of losing the truce entirely frightens the Assembly badly enough, they may order every Concord ship to withdraw, and leave Traverse Station to fall on its own." As if summoned by her words, a priority transmission chimed through the command center's speakers. Speaker Vash's face appeared on the screen, looking older and more tired than she had 2 days before, the weight of an impossible decision plainly visible on her ancient features. "Administrator Vey." "Captain Cade," she said without preamble. "The Assembly has been debating for the past 6 hours without pause. I will not pretend the outcome is settled. There are delegates in this chamber who believe our only path to safety lies in publicly disavowing the human alliance and hoping the Dominion honors its original truce." "And what do you believe, Speaker?" Cade asked quietly. Vash was silent for a long moment. "I believe," she said slowly, "that I have already made one terrible mistake regarding your people, Captain Cade, and I am not eager to compound it with a second. But belief alone does not command Concord fleets. I need something I can bring back to this Assembly, something that will convince delegates who are, right now, more afraid of Dominion retaliation than they are ashamed of abandoning an ally twice." Cade considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Then let me offer you something simple, Speaker Vash. Full sensor access to our fleet's approach data, our tactical projections for the coming battle, and an open channel to every Concord ship willing to fight alongside us. Let your delegates see for themselves what we're facing, and what we're capable of, before they vote. Sometimes the only argument that matters is the one people can watch unfold with their own eyes." Vash studied him for a long moment, before finally nodding. "I will bring that offer to the chamber. I cannot promise you the vote will go the way you hope, Captain, but I can promise you it will be an honest one, this time." The connection closed, and Threll turned to Cade, searching his face for some sign of the frustration she felt building in her own chest. Instead, she found only calm, patient acceptance, the expression of a man who had learned long ago that some battles had to be fought twice, once with weapons and once with words. "You don't seem worried," she said. "The Assembly could still abandon this fight entirely." "They could," Cade agreed. "It's happened before, and I won't pretend it wouldn't hurt to watch it happen again. But Administrator, 41 years ago, humanity learned a hard lesson about depending on other people's courage to survive. We stopped waiting for the Concord to decide our fate a long time ago. If the Assembly votes to stay out of this fight, my fleet holds this station without them. It'll cost us more than it should, but we've paid worse costs before, for less important reasons." Over the following day, as the true Dominion fleet drew steadily closer, Traverse Station transformed once more, this time not just with human engineers, but with a growing trickle of Concord ships arriving in ones and twos, uncertain and hesitant, their captains clearly still awaiting some final word from the Assembly, even as they positioned themselves near the human and allied fleet. Threll watched from the observation deck as a familiar old Ashinari cruiser, the Vante, took up position near the edge of the formation. Its captain, a woman named Erin Solt, whom Threll had trained alongside decades earlier. She opened a private channel. "Erin," she said, "I didn't expect to see you out here. Has the Assembly finally voted?" "No word yet," Erin answered, her voice tight with nerves. "But I grew tired of waiting for permission to do the right thing, Threll. My crew agrees. If the Concord won't send us officially, we came anyway. There are 11 other ships doing the same thing, scattered across a dozen different member species. Not an army, but not nothing either." Threll felt something warm and unexpected rise in her chest, something she had not felt in a very long time. Welcome to the fight, Erin. That evening, as the last light of the system's distant star faded from the observation deck's windows, Cade found Threll standing alone, watching the growing collection of ships assembling around her station, the disciplined ranks of the human-led alliance, the small but determined cluster of independent Concord volunteers, and behind them all, the vast dark stretch of space where the true Dominion fleet was drawing steadily nearer. 412 ships, Cade said quietly, coming to stand beside her. That's the number our long-range scouts confirmed an hour ago. 11 of them capital class. And we have? Threll asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer would not be comforting. 231, counting the Concord volunteers, Cade said. We are outnumbered, Administrator, significantly. Threll turned to look at him, searching his tired, scarred face for some trace of the fear she felt building in her own chest. She found instead something steadier, something that looked almost like quiet resolve. Then how do we win? She asked. Cade was quiet for a long moment, watching the dark space where the enemy fleet would soon appear. 41 years ago, Administrator, humanity learned that numbers alone don't win wars. Discipline does, trust does, and sometimes, the willingness to fight for something bigger than simple survival does, more than anything else. He turned to face her fully. Tomorrow, we're going to find out if that lesson still holds true, against the largest Dominion fleet any of us has ever faced. I won't lie to you and tell you I'm certain we'll win, but I can tell you this fleet has faced worse odds before, in the dead systems, when there was no Concord watching and no chance of reinforcement. We're still here. That has to count for something. Far across the darkness between them, the Kral Voss and its 400 escorts continued their slow, inevitable approach, and somewhere in the depths of the Concord assembly chamber, a divided council continued to argue over a vote that both sides now understood might decide the fate of everyone within reach of Traverse Station. Dawn, if it could be called that in the dim light of a distant star, would bring the answer to both questions at once. The Dominion fleet arrived at dawn, exactly when the sensors had predicted, 412 ships sliding out of the dark in perfect battle formation, led by the massive, scarred shape of the Kral Voss. Threll Vey stood on the observation deck of Traverse Station and watched the enemy fill her sensor display like a spreading stain, and beside her, Captain Marcus Cade watched with the same calm, patient focus he had shown since the moment his ship first appeared behind the veil. Assembly vote? He asked quietly, without looking away from the screen. Still no word, Threll admitted. Speaker Vash is still trying to hold the chamber together. I don't think they'll decide in time. Then we fight without them, Cade said, and there was no bitterness in his voice, only the simple acceptance of a man who had expected this outcome and prepared for it anyway. He opened a channel to his fleet. All ships. This is Prometheus Actual. The Dominion main fleet has arrived. We knew this moment was coming, and we've trained for it. I won't insult anyone by pretending the numbers favor us today. They don't. But every species in this fleet has faced this enemy before and survived, and every one of you knows exactly what's at stake if we fail here. Hold formation Anchor 7. Let them come to us. Across the Alliance fleet, voices answered in a dozen different tongues, calm and ready, the sound of soldiers who trusted their commander and trusted each other. Threll felt a strange, fierce pride swell in her chest, watching this patchwork alliance of the abandoned and the enslaved prepare to stand against an empire that had spent decades believing itself unstoppable. Then, just as the Dominion fleet crossed into engagement range, a new voice broke into the channel, hesitant at first, then growing steadier with each word. This is Speaker Dolm Vash, broadcasting to all Concord forces in range of Traverse Station. A pause, filled with the sound of a chamber still in chaos behind her. The assembly vote has concluded. By a margin of 6 votes, this council has authorized full military support for the defense of Traverse Station, in cooperation with the human-led Alliance fleet. All Concord vessels are ordered to engage the Dominion fleet immediately, and Captain Cade, her voice caught, just slightly. For whatever it is worth, this assembly is sorry it took 41 years and the edge of annihilation to remember what an ally is supposed to look like. Across the system, dozens of Concord warships that had been holding position at the very edge of sensor range, awaiting exactly this order, surged forward to join the Alliance formation, their crews finally free to fight for the station they had been quietly protecting all along. It was not the overwhelming force the Concorde could have sent if the vote had come days earlier, but it was enough to swell the defending fleet past 280 ships, and more importantly, it was a signal, visible to every crew in the Alliance, that the long silence between humanity and the Concorde had finally, truly, ended. "Belated, but welcome," Cade murmured, then raised his voice across the open channel. "All ships, Concorde reinforcements are joining formation. Adjust to anchor 9, and hold the line. Here they come." The Dominion fleet struck like a hammer blow, exactly as it had at the smaller battle 3 days earlier, except now on a scale that made the earlier fight look like a skirmish. 400 ships unleashed their combined firepower across the Alliance formation, and for several terrible minutes, the space around Traverse Station became a storm of light and fire that no sensor could fully track. Aboard the Kralvas, High Marshal Ethrax Kell watched the opening exchange with cold satisfaction, certain his numerical advantage would grind the Alliance formation apart within the hour. But as the battle continued, that satisfaction slowly curdled into something closer to concern. "High Marshal," Commander Vresh reported, "the Alliance formation is not breaking as projected. They're absorbing our attacks in overlapping defensive patterns, and the human ship at their center continues coordinating counterattacks with unusual precision." "Then focus everything on that human ship," Ethrax Kell snapped. "Every report we've gathered confirms it as their command anchor. Remove it, and the rest of this Alliance will scatter like the disorganized rabble it truly is." The order rippled through the Dominion fleet, and dozens of ships began converging their fire toward the Prometheus, exactly as Cade had warned would happen when the true battle began. On the bridge of the human flagship, Cade watched the incoming fire concentration on his tactical display, and allowed himself a grim, knowing smile. "They're doing it again," he said to his executive officer, Commander Ayana Reyes, a sharp-eyed woman who had served with him for over a decade. "Just like the Vanguard, they think killing the flagship wins the battle." "Should we adjust formation, sir?" Reyes asked. "We could pull back, let another ship draw their fire." "No," Cade said. "We planned for exactly this. Signal the Doran cruisers, execute pattern Hollow Star, and get me a channel to every capital ship in the fleet. It's time to show High Marshal Kell why this Alliance doesn't actually need one ship to survive." What followed was a maneuver Threll would later describe to her own grandchildren as the most beautiful piece of tactical coordination she had ever witnessed. As the Dominion fleet concentrated its firepower on the Prometheus, the ship did not retreat or hide. Instead, it held its position at the center of the formation, its shields straining, and its hull scarring under the relentless assault, while around it, the rest of the Alliance fleet executed a coordinated pincer maneuver that Cade had clearly drilled his allied captains on many times before. The small, impossibly fast Doran cruisers slipped through gaps in the Dominion formation that should not have existed, striking at supply and command ships deep within the enemy fleet before the larger Dominion vessels could react. The glowing blue Cathari warships pressed hard against the enemy's flanks, their aggressive tactics forcing Dominion captains to divide their attention between the flagship they were trying to destroy and the growing threats appearing on every other side of their formation. And the newly arrived Concorde ships, though smaller in number, added just enough additional firepower and confusion to tip dozens of individual engagements in the Alliance's favor. "High Marshal," Vresh reported, his voice rising with alarm. "We are losing ships across the formation faster than projected. The enemy fleet is not simply defending the flagship, they are using our focus on it as a distraction for a coordinated flanking assault. Our command ship, the HFY War, has lost primary shields. The Arkethan is reporting critical hull damage." Ethrax Kell's 4 dark eyes narrowed as he watched the battle unfold on his tactical display, understanding, too late, exactly what kind of enemy he now faced. This was not a desperate, disorganized alliance of frightened survivors. This was a fleet that had spent 41 years perfecting the art of fighting outnumbered and turning an enemy's own confidence against it. "Pull the fleet back to a defensive formation," he ordered, his rasping voice tight with something that might have finally been genuine concern. "Concentrate our remaining strength around the Kralvas. We will not win this engagement through attrition. We must find another way to break their formation." But the order came too late. As the Dominion fleet attempted to reorganize, The Prometheus, battered but still functioning, broke from the center of the Alliance formation and drove straight toward the Kral Voss itself, flanked by a tight escort of Cathari and Doran warships that had clearly rehearsed this exact maneuver many times before. "Sir, that's the enemy flagship," Reyes said, watching the tactical display with wide eyes. "Direct assault on the Kral Voss itself carries enormous risk." "I know," Cade said, "but High Marshal Kell built his entire strategy around destroying our command structure. Let's return the favor." He opened a fleet-wide channel. "All ships, converge on the Dominion flagship. If we can force Ethrax Kell to retreat or surrender, this battle ends today. If we don't, we're going to be fighting this same war for years. Let's finish it now." The final phase of the battle lasted nearly 40 minutes, the fiercest fighting Threll had ever witnessed, as the Alliance fleet threw everything it had into breaking through the Kral Voss's remaining escort. The Prometheus took hit after hit, its hull glowing red in places from sustained weapons fire, its crew fighting fires and hull breaches, even as they continued directing the assault. Twice, Threll was certain the ship would be destroyed. Twice, it somehow held together, its weapons never falling silent, its position never wavering from the front of the assault. Finally, with a spread of concentrated fire from a dozen different Alliance ships striking simultaneously, the Kral Voss's shields collapsed entirely, and its main weapons array went dark. On the bridge of his crippled flagship, surrounded by the sounds of alarms and dying systems, High Marshal Ethrax Kell stared at the tactical display, showing his once overwhelming fleet reduced to scattered, retreating fragments, and understood, with the particular clarity that comes only in defeat, that everything he had believed about this small, isolated species had been wrong. "Open a channel to the human flagship," he said quietly. A moment later, Cade's tired, scarred face appeared on the Dominion Bridge's main display, standing amid the smoke and flickering lights of his own battered command center. "High Marshal Ethrax Kell," Cade said, "I'm listening." 41 years ago, Ethrax Kell said slowly, "My predecessors judged your species weak enough to isolate and eventually consume at our leisure. I see now that judgment was gravely mistaken." He paused, his ancient eyes studying the human captain, with something that might have been grudging respect. "The Dominion fleet is withdrawing from this engagement, Captain Cade. I will not pretend this is the end of our conflict, but I will acknowledge that today was not the victory my empire expected." "Then withdraw, High Marshal," Cade said, his voice carrying no triumph, only exhausted resolve, "and carry a message back to whatever remains of your empire's leadership. Humanity did not spend 41 years in the dark building this alliance out of hatred for the Dominion. We built it because your empire taught 9 different species what it means to lose everything, and every one of us decided we would rather stand together than let that happen to anyone else. If the Dominion wants a different future than the one it's currently heading toward, that door remains open. But it will not open through conquest, not anymore." The connection closed, and across the battered remains of the Alliance fleet, the surviving Dominion ships began their slow, ragged retreat back toward the dead systems, leaving behind the wreckage of nearly half their once mighty invasion force. In the days that followed, Traverse Station became something it had never been before, a place of genuine celebration, as human, Doran, Cathari, Ashinari, and a dozen other species worked side by side to repair the damage and honor the dead. Threll Vey stood once more on the observation deck, this time beside a healing but proud Captain Cade, watching engineers from a dozen different worlds cooperate to restore the station's battered defense grid. "Speaker Vash has requested a full assembly session," Threll said. "Formal recognition of the alliance, discussion of reopening the border, perhaps even eventual Concord membership for your new allies. It won't happen quickly. Old fears don't vanish overnight, even after a battle like this one." "I wouldn't expect it to," Cade said. "Trust takes longer to rebuild than a station's shield generators, Administrator. But it can be rebuilt, if both sides are willing to do the work." He looked out at the mixed fleet still holding position around the station, human and alien hulls resting peacefully side by side for the first time in 41 years. "That's really all we ever wanted in the end. Not an apology, not even gratitude. Just the chance to be judged by what we actually are, instead of what we were assumed to be when everyone stopped paying attention." Threll thought of the young officer she had been, decades ago, casting a frightened vote in a crowded chamber. and of the tired, dignified silence with which humanity had accepted its exile. She thought of everything that silence had actually contained: 41 years of quiet, determined survival, of reaching out to the suffering and the abandoned, of building something far greater than the isolated, broken remnant the Concorde had once assumed it left behind. "For what it's worth, Captain Cade," she said quietly, "I don't think anyone who witnessed what happened here will ever underestimate humanity again." Cade allowed himself a small, tired smile, watching the sun rise slowly over the healing station, over the mixed fleet of the free and the once enslaved, over a border that, after 41 long years of silence, had finally, truly, opened again. "Good," he said. "Because, Administrator, this was only the beginning. The Dominion will be back, someday, stronger and angrier than before. But this time, when they come, they won't just be facing one small, isolated world anymore." He looked out at the fleet, at the quiet, hard-won peace of the moment. "They'll be facing everyone that world refused to forget.